Trump's most important policy, the steel tariff. All right, so check this out, my friends. Watch this. Adjusting imports of steel into the United States. Dateline, February 10th, 2025. I'm going to impose a 25% ad valorem tariff on such articles imported from most countries, being steel, to adjust the imports of steel articles. All right. I may remove or modify the restriction on steel articles, if necessary, adjust the tariff as applies to other countries as the national security interests of the United States require. This is a huge national security issue. I cannot understand how people don't get this. Check this out. This is absolutely This is voxday.net, voxday.net. This is absolutely necessary if the U.S. is going to remain even a regional power. Whereas in 1945, the USA produced 72% of the world's steel, is now producing just 4.2% of it. Whereas it once produced 229 million metric tons of iron and steel, it now produces only 79 million metric tons, which isn't even enough to account for our annual steel consumption of 100 million metric tons. We're not self-sufficient in steel. At this point, the USA cannot be considered a global military power because it lacks the industrial capacity to fight a war over an extended period of time. We're relying on our hostile partners. The president's new steel tariffs are in place to allow the USA to begin rebuilding the industrial base that it stupidly abandoned in World War II, 100%. Post-World War II, I should say. So I just thought it was interesting. So I'm going to share with you something here. Here's a guy named Senator Lamar Alexander. You know, you may or may not remember old Lamar. He was a senator from Texas, and his little, he had his little red and black freaking shirt on, and then he'd drive around his pickup truck to campaign in Tennessee. Changes needed in steel tariffs. He says this is a case of a sad story of steel tariffs right here. He'll say, Tennessee has almost 100 times more steel consuming jobs than steel producing jobs, okay? As a whole, the U.S. has 12.8 million. This is back in 2003, by the way. The U.S. has 12.8 million steel consuming jobs as only 226,000 steel producing jobs. I don't like what he's saying. He's saying those steel producing jobs are minimal compared to the steel consuming jobs. So if he got rid of the steel producing jobs, it would be okay. Well, I just showed you why he would not be, because we don't produce enough our own steel to offset our consumption. All right, so right here. Ironically, at the time of the tariff in March of 2002, because President Bush put a tariff on steel, 30% actually, many auto parts suppliers in the U.S. are buying only about 5% of their steel overseas. In other words, about $5.4 billion of the U.S. auto industry purchased in 2002, only about $2.7 million came from overseas. Right? But as soon as the tariff was in place, domestic steel producers raised their prices on the 95% of steel that was being produced in the U.S. Suddenly, auto parts suppliers and other steel consuming businesses were paying up to 30% more for all their steel. How does he get the 30%? Because of Bush's 30% tariff. So he's just saying, oh, you're going to pay. I'm going to show you why this is silly. Tariffs are 30% higher. That's a 30% tax, essentially. All right. In some cases, they're paying even more because of the shortages. Interesting. We're going to show you why that's silly here, too. Shortages. U.S. auto parts suppliers were dealing with shortages and are paying 30% more. Obviously, you'd be able to see that in inflation numbers, right? Oddly, the parts suppliers turn around to their customers, the big auto companies, and try to pass on these increases. The answer from the auto companies was no, we're cutting costs, not raising them. So the auto companies, I'm just going to show you, new cars and trucks. Remember, George Bush put his 30% steel tariff on in March of 2002. How did the price of trucks and cars went down 1.5%? In 2002, another 1.55% in 2003, another 0.6% in 2004. Don't new cars have steel in there? I think so. And yet their prices went down. Oh, so let's see about auto parts, because the auto parts guys are like, oh my goodness, don't you know? Motor vehicle parts and equipment. Let's see what happened there. So here, the Bush put his tariff on in 2002. Well, the year before they put the tariffs on, the inflation on auto parts was 3.22. The next year, well, after he put the tariff on, it fell to 2%. The year after that was down to 0.86. So inherently, auto parts supplies saw prices going down. New and used vehicles saw actually deflation, even though the steel industry was getting a 30% tariff, and supposedly they were going to pass that on to they raised their prices by 30%. And yet somehow we saw deflation in new cars, and same with used cars. And we saw disinflation when it came, or decelerating inflation when it came to auto parts supplies. Very interesting. So Lamar, in fact, it's just, the guy's just clowns us. Now you can see, actually I want to show you something here. See, in terms of producer price index for cold rolled steel sheet and strip, I don't know what that is. In March of 2002, when Bush put the tariff on, it was at 102.8. I'm assuming that's per million metric ton. I don't know. And then it went up to March of 2004. It went up to, what did I say, 102. It went to 139. So that in 2 years, that went up. That's a pretty significant increase in the price of cold rolled steel sheet and strip. All right, that without question. We can go to iron and steel metals right here, iron and steel. You're going to see the same thing. In 2002, it was trading at 109, and then by the end of March of 2004, 2 years later, is at 150. So some significant producer price increases in those commodities, without question. One thing that was interesting, though, let's see if I can find it. This is fabricated steel plate, and it didn't increase at all during that time. I don't know the difference or anything. I found that interesting. All right, so let me show you something else here. So we're going to go back over there again. This is from March 2003. Lamar Alexander griping about the tariffs on steel. We're going to go back all the way back, amigos, all the way back to 2007 in the great state of Maine, where all the cool kids are from. Right, and this is a debate that is happening in Maine. The Bath Anvil. I don't know if Bath Iron Works was around back then. I don't know, but BIW is they make ships in a Bath, right? And then they're debating the Lewiston Daily Sun about the importance of steel tariffs. Very interesting. And kudos to the Lewiston Daily Sun for allowing the Bath Anvil to write on their pages. All right, so right here. So right here. Now, this is what the Bath Anvil writes. How could the protective tariff on steel be beneficial to the country when the burden of the tariff on the bridge and locomotive building had to be made up by a protective tariff on bridges and locomotives, and the burden of the tariff on bridges and locomotives put on railroads and their charge for freight and passengers? All right, so again, he's using the Lamar Alexander one. The producers are just part of the equation. The consumers of steel are going to pay a big price for the tariffs that are protecting the producers, all right? The locomotive, the steel industries and whatnot are going to pay a higher price, the bridge builders, because of the tariffs on the steel guys, the tariffs that were protecting the steel guys. This is the same last line of defense in which the free traders have always made their last stand. The theory that the consumer is necessarily penalized to the extent of the production according to the producer. Because a protective tariff permits a higher price of steel products than would otherwise prevail, it does not follow that higher prices must be paid by passengers and freight on the railways which buy the high-priced rails and rolling stocks. For instance, on the Great Lake, American vessels have a lucrative trade all to themselves, and shipbuilding has grown in other parts. Shipbuilding has grown and flourished there as not in any other part of the United States, the Great Lakes. The great steel steamships, which ply between the lake ports, have no foreign competition any more than the railroads. The railroads, indeed, are their only competitors. Now, these American ships built exclusively on tariff-protected steel and themselves absolutely protected are carrying freight at a much less rate per mile than any other vessel in the world. There is no competition. The steel that is building those Great Lakes ships have no competition. The ships are being built by protective steels. They're not competing against foreign merchants, and yet their prices are the lowest in any other place in the world. Their freight, any other place in the world. Protected American ships in the foreign trade show the same result years ago. And there's no doubt in our mind that had they been adequately protected after the Civil War, they would still be carrying foreign cargoes at less rates than other vessels of the world, even though they were built with protected steel, i.e. tariffs. The argument that protection diminishes foreign trade does not strengthen this case, since our foreign trade is greater today than it has ever been. And it's not because there's nothing to carry our ships on. We are making the ships. We're producing the ships with protected steel, and yet the trade is going through the roof like it was never seen. In fact, this is very interesting here. There is no trouble with our foreign trade, and our workmen are better off than those of any other nation. The American problem is to get workers. It's not to get work. We have more work than we can know. We don't have enough that we can handle. We don't have enough workers. How in Iraq, the same thing. Oh, but back in the old days, it's always the same. I think even Aristotle or Socrates or something like that. So the kids today don't understand. It's just the same. The American problem is to get workers and not to get work. There are no workmen in the world who have so much of the good things of life as those in the United States, and there's no other adequate explanation except the protective policy which has been so consistently pursued by the American government. The free traders' assertion that during the same 40 years, the last 40, England built up an enormous steel industry, built up without protective tariffs, and at the same time paid the highest wages in Europe is true. But not to the point, since the highest wages in free trade England, do not compare to the average wage in protectionist United States. And one only has to see what the British working man enjoy of life's good things and compare them with what the American worker and his family have to be convinced that the condition of the American is vastly to be preferred to that of the Englishman. I mean, there's some arguments again. They say, hey, should we have this forever? Maybe, maybe not. But while our industry is down and basically almost out, relying on China, and I didn't even look at when I first started my YouTube channel, one of my first videos was large power transmissions, LPTs. We were relying, and I did a blog post on it on my joshscanlon.com webpage. I lost that. I've forever gone. It was a great blog post. We're relying on China to import our transmissions. Large power transmissions for electrical distribution lines and stuff and transmission lines. It was crazy. This is insanity. China is not our friend. I'm not saying they're a hostile enemy necessarily, but they'd rather see America in the dust than see us grow. So why do we want to rely on them? Protect the tariff, protect the steel industry to protect our own national security. It's mandatory, man. And the idea that there can be mass inflation because it simply didn't happen under the Bush tariffs. It didn't. All right, love your thoughts. Smash that like button. God bless. We'll see you.